What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another video. In today's video, we're going to build a DogeCoin price tracker app in light of recent craziness with cryptocurrencies. I'm going to continue on that trend and we're going to build this out. So we'll take a look at custom cells, number formatters, date formatters, using an API call, custom headers and all that goodness. So if that all sounds good, make sure you start by destroying that like button down below. It helps out so much. I super appreciate it. Hit subscribe while you're at it if you're new and haven't done so already. That all said, let's get into the video. All right, we're gonna go ahead and get started by opening up Xcode and creating a new project here. We're gonna stick with the app template under iOS, and let's go ahead and call this app DogeCoin. You wanna make sure the language is set to Swift, lifecycle UIKit, and interface is storyboard. Go ahead and continue, save the project wherever you'd like. I shall toss it onto my desktop here. And once Xcode creates it, go ahead and close this right panel, expand your window, and let's jump into our view controller. So before we get into the weeds of the code, let's talk about the high-level pieces that we are going to need. So we're going to want to have an interface to show our information. So we're going to say that's our UI. We're going to want to follow MVVM. So we're going to want a view model. We're going to want to get our model back. Now we're going to get that model back from an API call. So I'm going to go ahead and say we want an API call here, and we can also go ahead and add, a pull to refresh control in case we leave the app open and we want to see the up-to-date price for Dogecoin. So I'll add that here as well. So let's also, before we get into this here, let's go to my browser over here. We've got this web page open for coinmarketcap.com. They've got a really extensive cryptocurrency API. You can get a free API key, and there's a variety of things you can do here. They literally have a ton of endpoints, but this is the API we're going to end up using. If you want to go crazy with it and extend the app, by all means. I've actually got a endpoint opened up here already, which returns us info for Dogecoin. So we're going to slightly modify this, but let me at least start by copying that URL. And we're going to go ahead and create an object that's going to be responsible for, performing our API calls. So let's go ahead and create a new Swift file. I'm going to call this API caller. And let's go ahead and define that class here, API caller. It's going to have a static shared instance, so it's a singleton. So we'll say static let shared will be an API caller. We're going to privatize the initializer just like that. And we're also going to want some constants in here. So I'll go ahead and create a struct for constants. I'll go ahead and paste in our URL. Just like that. You can see it's a kind of long URL, but let me go ahead and make this a little cleaner. So first and foremost, I'm going to go ahead and pull out our API key here. You can see it's a query parameter, but we're going to actually change that up. So let's say static let API key is this guy. We'll also go ahead and pull out our base URL. So we'll go ahead and grab this guy, and I'm gonna make this its own constant. And by setting things up this way, you're more flexible, and if you wanted to go ahead and extend your application here. Now we're gonna go ahead and call this one a endpoint. And I'll also go ahead and grab the Dogecoin here. And let me actually move this here as well. So we'll go ahead and say that this is going to be our API key header. Go ahead and paste that there. And we'll grab Dogecoin here. And I'm going to move that into its own constant here. So I'll say Doge will be Dogecoin. So there are a couple of our constants. Now let's go ahead and jump back into our view controller for a quick moment. Let's talk about what our user interface is going to look like. So we probably can use something like a table view or a collection view. It's really up to you. We're going to use a table view, and it's basically going to be what you saw in the beginning of the video. So let's go ahead and create a pretty bare bones table view here, and we'll start to fetch our data, and then we'll kind of beautify the way the layout looks. So no custom cells quite yet. We might get there. We shall see. So we'll go ahead and say table is going to be a table view. Going to go ahead and return it here, and we're going to register a vanilla UI table view cell for a identifier of just cell like that. Go ahead and give this controller a title of DogeCoin. We're going to go ahead and add the table view. We'll go ahead and assign its delegate and its data source, just like that. We're going to want to go ahead and override view did layout sub views. And we're going to want to add the table view, or rather give the table view a frame, I should say. So we'll say the frame is view.bounds. So there is that. We're going to get errors on the delegate and data source line there because we need to conform to those protocols. So we shall do that right up here. Now the data source has some required methods we need to bring in, which is number of rows. We'll just hard code it to be, I don't know, maybe 10, just to make sure that, you know, something is working. Then we also need cell for row at index path, within which we will go ahead and dequeue a reusable cell with a identifier which matches what we have registered, which is cell. Go ahead and return it there. And just for the time being, let me go ahead and just assign some random text on here so we can actually go ahead and make sure that we are seeing this table view once we give it a run in our simulator, just like that. Let's open up our simulator here and just bear with Xcode. Hopefully everything compiles and we start to see something show up there. So it looks like it just finished building, and there is our application, and I hope to see a table view here. All right. Going nice and slow because it knows I'm making a video. Just bear with my simulator. But once we have a table view here, we'll basically move on to maybe doing the table header and then hooking up our API call. So there's our table view looking awesome. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to jump into assets here and create a new asset called DogeCoin by right-clicking and hitting new image assets. And I've got a picture of the DogeCoin logo here, so I'll go ahead and grab that and drop that into 1x. And now what we can actually do is at the bottom of view did load, I am going to move this stuff, and we're going to go ahead and say set up table. And we'll make that its own function. I'll put it below the overrides here. We'll go ahead and say it's a private function, set up table. We'll paste in that code there. And I'll also go ahead in here and say create table header. And our header is just basically going to show the icon for the DogeCoin logo as well as the current price, which we will get from the API. So let's first and foremost create the header. It's going to be a UI view with a frame. X will be 0, Y will be 0, and we're going to make this the same width of the screen as well as the same height, so it'll be a square. At the bottom here, we can say table view dot header, table header view rather I should say, is going to be header view. And let's go ahead and bring in the image view into here. But first we'll say header dot clips to bounds is true, so nothing, you know, overflows. Let's go ahead and create an image view here for our coin logo. So we'll go ahead and it takes an image, and this is the image we just brought in, which is named DogeCoin. And once we have that image view created, we can add it to the header. So I'll say header.add subview is our image view. Now we want to give our image view a frame and a content mode as well. We don't want the image to be stretched out, so we'll say aspect fit. And finally, let's go ahead and give this guy a frame. So I'll first actually say the size here of the image view is going to be the frames width divided by maybe 2. And now what we'll want to do is we want to go ahead and assign a frame onto the image view. So we'll say the Y is 10, this will be size as well, and we want this to be horizontally centered. So I'll go ahead and say view dot frame dot size dot width, subtracting the size divided by 2. So let's go ahead and give this a run, and let's make sure we're seeing our, whoops, looks like that was a typo, this should be header. Let's make sure we're seeing our actual header view. So let's fix this. This should be assigned to the header that we declared right above it. Go ahead and give that a run, and we should see our nice Dogecoin appear. It's a little big, but that's okay. We can easily make that smaller. So let's go ahead and say divided by maybe 4 here. And since we're using, you know, relative math there, everything should work as expected. So cool, there's our Dogecoin logo. Now we can work on actually calling the API. So if we actually come back here, we see that we get a bunch of data, But let's go into the API docs so you guys get a bit of an intro into kind of reading these docs. If we go to authentication, the most important thing that I want to talk about here is you can see this portion that I've highlighted. You can pass the API key as a query parameter in the URL itself, or you can provide it via a header, which is their preferred mechanism, and it's also preferred when you're building out, larger professional apps. So in our API caller, let's go ahead and write out a function to get DogeCoin data. So this is going to be pretty simple. It's going to be a public function. It's going to be get DogeCoin data, and it's going to have a completion handler, and this completion handler will be an escaping block. It's going to give us a result, and if it succeeds, we're going to get DogeCoin data back. Otherwise, we're going to get an error back. Now, what is DogeCoin data? Well, it's going to be a model that we're going to define. But before we do that, you can see that we already have the thing that I copied from the API docs over here, which is the header name. But let's go ahead and create a new file here for our models to keep everything nice and organized. So we'll create a Swift file, go ahead and call it models. And let's see if I can remember what I just called it there. I think we called it DogeCoin data, and this is basically going to be codable. This is what we expect to get back from the API. So let's come back to this here and make sure this is spelled correctly. That error should hopefully go away if I hit Command B, since we just created it. Awesome, looking pretty good. So now we want to actually perform the API call. So let me just line break this. So the first thing we want to do is create a URL. So our URL is going to be constants.base URL plus constants.endpoint, and we'll just stick with that for a quick second. We do want to extend it a little bit, and if we're not able to create it, we're just going to return, and we're going to want to go ahead and say completion and a failure occurred, and we want to pass back a error. Now, an error didn't really occur here in the sense that we have an error object. We just know that we failed to create a URL. So what we could actually do is create a custom error here called API error, and we can go ahead and add a custom case in here called invalid URL. And now in here, we can go ahead and say API error dot invalid URL. So that way the caller knows what actually went wrong. So now that we've got a URL, we want to create a task. So I'm going to go ahead, create a request. So I'm going to say var request is going to be a URL request. Let's see if I can find it here. URL request, just like that. And you can actually create this with a URL. So we'll do that. Now on this request, we're going to want to set some information. So the first thing we want to do is set some headers. So we're going to go ahead and say we want to set a value for an HTTP header. The value is going to be constant dot API key, and the header field itself is going to be constants dot API key header. So the value for the API key header is our API key. We'll also want to go ahead and say that the method on this is going to be a get request. And now we can go ahead and perform a task here. So we're going to say URL session.shared, and this is going to be a request. So we can say it's a data request actually. And we want the data request that takes a request and a completion handler. So let's go ahead and find it. This one right here takes in that request we created right above, and our completion handler is pretty standard. We don't care about the response, but we do care about the error. What I'll go ahead and do here is I'm going to say if let error is a error. In case we found an error, we can go ahead and say that we've definitely failed, and we can pass back the error to our caller. And if that doesn't occur, we can say guard let data equals data. Make sure we have some valid data. And what we now need to do is try to convert that data into our actual DogeCoin data object. So we'll go ahead and say our result is going to be try to use JSON decoder to decode a DogeCoin data.self from the data we get back. And if we're able to do that, we can say call the completion handler and pass back the results. Otherwise, something definitely went wrong, so we can pass back the error that we caught here. And most importantly, everyone forgets to do this. Don't forget to do task.resume because you're going to be pulling your hair out as to why it's not working. So that's basically our API call in a nutshell. The one thing we want to go ahead and add up here is we do want to add another query parameter. So we can go ahead and say question mark, and we're going to say this is a slug, and it's going to equal our constants.DogeCoin. Constants dot, whoops, I think it's called DogeCoin. Let's see what we ended up calling it. Constants.doge. Cool. And I'll also go ahead and print out our entire URL here just to make sure that we're creating the correct URL. So we'll say API URL is going to be our URL.absolute string. And basically what we're doing by using that slug parameter is we're basically saying only give us the information for Dogecoin back. You can of course pass in like Bitcoin or anything else, but it's pretty important that we do that to get the data that we care about. So now that we've created our API call, let's go ahead and fill in our codable model based on the information that we see here. So we can actually be a little smart about this, and I'll go ahead and copy all this business here. We'll copy everything down to here, and we're going to want to have a model which basically mimics this. So I'll go ahead and create a comment here. I'm going to go ahead and paste this stuff in, and you can see there is a status and there is data. So what I am going to care about here is we're going to ignore the error, or the status rather. So let's go ahead and let's see how this is structured. So status is just this first block here. So we can actually ignore this. I don't particularly care about it. But what we do care about is data here. So data looks to, points to another object. Looks like it's ID 74, and it has a bunch of sub data inside of it. So we're going to go ahead and say there is data, which is going to be of type Doge data. We'll need to create another object here. We'll go ahead and let's actually be smarter about this. Let me actually create another model here. I will call this API response is going to be codable. It's going to have a data, and data will be a crypto data. I will go ahead and create a crypto data here, which will be codable. And now that's going to have a single integer in it. And that integer is going to point to, I guess it'll have a integer as the key in a dictionary that points to more data. So we'll go ahead and let's figure out how we want to do this. So data is this, and I don't think it's an array. So let's come back here and take a look. Probably a good lesson for y'all to figure out, how you figure out what to put here. So it actually does look like data is an array. If we look at it, it looks like it's a square bracket. So, and it points to 74 here, which is a key, and the value is this other object here. So let's go ahead and say in our response here that data is going to be a dictionary of integer. And we're going to go ahead and get rid of this, an integer, and it'll be a Dogecoin data. Now, what does Dogecoin data have on it? It has an ID, name, and symbol. So let me just add those for now, and let's actually make sure that it's working. So we have an ID, which is an integer. We've got a name, and we've got a symbol. Just make sure you spell everything correctly. Otherwise, it obviously won't work. But let's make sure this is actually working before we move further. So let's go down to our API caller again, and we need to change this to now decode a API response. So we'll go ahead and call this our response. And now what we want to do is from our response, we have data. And what I'm going to go ahead and do is we want to get the values out of the dictionary and get the first one here. So we'll go ahead and say guard let Dogecoin data is going to equal this. Otherwise, we'll go ahead and return, and our completion handler for success will now take in Dogecoin data. So let's see how that's looking pretty good. Let's go ahead and I'm going to print out the response here to make sure what we're getting is okay. So we'll go ahead and say API result is going to be response. Let me put a line break in here so we can read it more easily. All right, looking pretty good. Put that there, and I'll put this here. And let's go into our view controller and call this API. So we're going to come to the bottom of view.load, and I'm going to go ahead and say fetch data. Pretty simple. And when we fetch the data, what we can go ahead and do, if we think about it, we actually want to set up the table header after we've fetched the data. So we'll remove that call and we'll create a function to fetch data. And we'll say API caller shared. Let's go ahead and try to get our Doge data. So we'll go ahead and switch on the results. The result will have a success with some data. It'll also have a failure with a error, which hopefully doesn't occur. So we'll print it out if it does, so we can take care of it. And in this case, we'll go ahead and print out success with our data here, so we know that we actually got the data. So that was a lot of talking, so let me go ahead and pause our app and give it a run once more, make sure we don't have any errors. And let's see what we get printed out in our console down here. We should get hopefully our data. So here's a URL we're hitting. So let's see, we have a slug, the URL looks correct, but now it looks like we have a decoding error. So what it's saying is coding keys data is a int value, and it's saying no value associated with the key data. So the easiest way to fix this, in my experience, is you can just dump out the raw JSON that the API call is giving you, and you can use that to figure out, what keys you're getting back. So we're going to say JSON serialization. Go ahead and give me a JSON object from the data, just like that. I will go ahead and just print out the raw JSON, and this will, literally dump out whatever the network is giving you back without trying to decode it into a codable object. So go ahead and do that, and let's see what we get dumped out. So we are definitely getting something out. We're getting status. We're getting looks like we're actually getting an error. So error message is saying API key is missing. So let's see why that is. So now we know that our API call is going through, but the key is missing. So we're saying constants.API key for the header field for that particular header. So let's make sure that's looking good. So there is our API key. I believe it's correct. So let me go ahead and double check my key here. So we'll see that we have a API key as a query parameter. Let me make sure that I copy and paste that correctly. Looks like we did. And this says CMC Pro API key. Let's come back to the documentation. Let's make sure that field is correct. So preferred method is via a custom header. We need to prefix it with the X dash. So this should be X-CMC Pro API key. Go ahead and give this a run one more time. And now we should actually hopefully be getting our data back, which it looks like we are. Let's double check. All right, there is the tons of data that we requested. We have a data key here, which points to this object with a 74 key and all the other goodness inside of it. And let's see, are we able to decode properly? Looks like we are successfully decoding too, which is looking great, awesome. So we can delete this JSON nonsense since it's working here. And now what we want to actually go ahead and do is let's go ahead and extend our codable model to pull out more information. So we have the ID name symbol, that's perfectly fine. What else do we care about? So we have slug, which is basically the name. We don't really want that. We have, we have date added, which is a string. That's probably a good one to hang on to, so we'll hang on to that. Now in here we also have tags, so we can probably hang on to that as well. It's an array of strings, it looks like. And basically all the data that we're putting in here, we're going to convert this to show up on our UI. So let's go ahead and get rid of these since we've got them already. And let's see, what else do we want? So we can also grab, we can grab total supply maybe. And I want the price, which is pretty important. Total supply, so we'll say total supply is a string as well. Is it a string? Let's double check here. Let's see, where did it go? Total supply, that does not look like a string, that looks like a floating point. So we'll go ahead and make that a float. And then there's a quote in here, which is obviously the most important thing. So this is a array, points to a dictionary. And let's see, so we're gonna go ahead and say that the quote is going to be a dictionary where the key is string USD and the value of it is this other object here. So I'll go ahead and say This is a string, and the object we'll create is another one. We'll say it's a quote. So we'll say quote is codable here. And let's see what parts of the quote we want. So we'll get the price and the volume for 24 hours. So we go ahead and say in here, I'm going to say let price is a float and let volume is also a float. Now the reason I know it's a float is well, you can see that it's, a super long decimal. It's not a double with only 2 decimal places, it's multiple. Same thing for the volume here. So that's basically the quirks of the data that we need. Let's go ahead and give this a run and make sure we're still decoding everything properly. And then the last thing left to do is, make sure we can plumb it into our UI. So it looks like we have an issue here for total supply, and the reason is because I have a silly typo. There should be a U in there. Let's go ahead and try that one more time. Good example is to make sure you spell things correctly. So, all right, so it's definitely giving us a result, and we're getting success printed out here, which is looking awesome. So let's go back to our API caller and get rid of that print statement here. Since this is all looking nice and good, we can go back into our view controller, and we can get rid of this here as well. And now that we have the data, what we basically want to do is we want to create table view cells which are going to show this data. Right now we're not even showing anything. So we're going to want to create view models which will drive our table view from the data. So first of all, let's go ahead and capture weak self. And I'm going to go ahead and say self.data is going to be data. Now this data represents the DogeCoin data, so I'll create that as a optional up here. We'll go ahead and say DogeCoin data, just like that. It's going to be optional, so we'll assign it like that. Let's see where it went. And the next thing that we want to go ahead and do is on the main thread, we want to update our table view and create our view model. So we'll say main thread asynchronously, go ahead and perform set up view models. So we'll go ahead and do that in a separate function to keep our code nice and organized. So we'll create that here, and I promise we're almost done. The first thing we're going to want to go ahead and do is call setup table header. Setup, let's see, not table. We want to set up, what did I call it? Setup table. We called it create table header. So we'll go ahead and call that. Now, in our table header, we only did the image view first. Now what we're going to also go ahead and do is we're going to do the price label, since we'll put that at the top. So the first thing I'm going to do here is we're going to say guard let the price is going to be the data.quote for, and let's see, we care about USD dot, we care about the price, which will be a floating point. And we want to make sure we have a price before we can actually put it into our label. So let's go ahead and create a label here, and let's just dump in the price. We're going to need to use a number formatter to actually go ahead and format set a price. But we can just drop that in to make sure we at least have something as we get started. We'll add a label as a subview. Let me also go ahead and make the text alignment center. We'll also bump up the font on here. We'll say system font, size 22, weight medium. And let's see, we want to give a frame to our label. So I'll go ahead and say 10 from the left. The Y will be 20 plus size, which is the size of our image view. The width here will be frames width minus 20, and the height will maybe give it 120. So I did that fairly quickly. Hopefully y'all followed. Let's go ahead and give it a run. And let's make sure we're at least seeing the price up here now. So let's see what the heck is going on. All right, so we're definitely making our API call. Why are we not seeing our actual stuff here? I want to say it's because of our price. So let's put a print in here. We'll say creating header. Let's try that again, creating header. Go ahead and give it a run. Let's make sure our function is being called. If it is, we know we're getting that far and we're getting stuck at our unwrap here. If we are, let me just go ahead and hard code this to make sure that the issue is the quote that we're unwrapping. All right, still not seeing it, which is not good. So let's see what the heck is going on here. So let's see. So we're creating our label here. We're creating a price. We're saying create table header. This is setup table view. All right, we're saying create table header there as well. Let's see if we're calling, we're not calling this anymore. So once our API call is done, instead of calling the create table header, we want to actually say set up the table view. Basically what's happening is we're not even adding it as a sub view. So now we should see both the price here and the image up there. So let me undo to get our unwrap back, and we'll go ahead and fix our call. So this should be set up for the table. Go ahead and run it, and hopefully we see the DogeCoin price now. All right, looking good. It's trading at 59 cents. So first and foremost, we do want to tweak a couple things to make this look nicer. First of all, we want to format this price into an actual currency. So what I'm going to do is we can go ahead and create a number formatter. I'm going to create it statically up here. We'll say static formatter is going to be a number formatter, and we're going to create it in this block here. So we'll go ahead and say formatter is a number formatter. We're going to set the formatters locale to be the current. We'll go ahead and return the formatter. And we want to set the format style on here is what I believe it's called. Let's see if I can find it. Number style. And what we care about is the currency style. And what this lets us do now is back down here, we can actually use this to get a proper formatted string. So first of all, we need to create a number, which is a NS number. We're going to create it with the price value. Then we can say get the string, which is going to be our self.formatter. It's capital S because it's static, and we're going to want to get a string from a particular number, which is right up above. And finally, we can assign this string down here. And if you give it a run now, what you'll see is that you'll get the $sign and things will be formatted. It will drop the, the extraneous decimal floating points. Also go ahead and bump up the font size here just to make things a little nicer. We'll make the height maybe like 200 because it's a little small right now. We probably care about the price. It's kind of important. All right, looking pretty good. And also actually decrease the height of the header here. You can go ahead and maybe divide it by, I don't know, divide it by 2, and let's see what that looks like. All right, looks like it's cut off now, so that's not good. Let's go ahead and maybe divide it by 1.5. Kind of guessing here. You could optionally use constraints as well, a little up to you. So that's looking pretty good. The next thing that's left to do is actually plumb some data into our actual table view cells there. So we're going to want to create a custom cell, and I'm also going to go ahead on this table view and assign its frame to 0 and its style to group. By assigning the style to be grouped, your cells are going to have a background now, so it looks a lot nicer. But what we will go ahead and do is let's create a custom table view cell here. So we'll say this is a Cocoa Touch class. We're going to subclass a UI table view cell, and I'll go ahead and call this a Doge table view cell. Go ahead and create it. So we'll start by deleting all the stuff in here. First thing we want in here is a identifier like that. We're going to want to override the initializer, call super on it, just like all of our overrides. Make sure you super initialize the same constructor instead of a different one. You're going to want the required initializer here. Let's see, what else do we want? We're going to want layout subviews, in which we'll call super layout subviews, and we're also going to want the ability to configure with a view model. Now we want to create a view model, so a good practice is just take the name of the class and suffix it by view model. And our cells are basically just going to have 2 labels. So we'll go ahead and say there's a title, and then there's going to be a value, just like that. And let's go ahead and take a look. So what do we want in here? It'll be the Doge table view cell view model. And we basically, like I said, want 2 labels on here. So let's go ahead and create those. I'll go ahead and say label, which will be this. And we'll go ahead and say that this is a label, UI label. Go ahead and return it. Now, before we go ahead and change the fonts and all that goodness, I'll just go ahead and make sure this is working first. This will be value label. The only difference on this one is it's going to be right aligned. So we'll go ahead and say alignment is to the right. Go ahead and add both of these as subviews. We'll say our value label, and we also want to go ahead and add just our label. And we also need to, most importantly, make sure we assign the frames on here. So we're going to first say size to fit to make sure the label self sizes, and we'll say labels frame is going to be CG rect, 10 from the left, maybe even 15. 0 from the top, width will be the width itself, so we'll say label.frame.size.width, and the height will be content view frame size height, and we could actually basically copy and paste this, more or less, for the value label. The width will be the value label's width, the height will not change, y will not change. The only thing that's going to change is the x. We're going to say this is the content view, subtracting 15 and subtracting the value label's width. So I know we just did a lot, but bear with me, we are almost done. I completely promise, even though I've said that 5 times, but let's see what the problem here is. This should be content views, frame size width. And now that we have the frame set up here, in the configure function, we can say the labels text is the viewModels title, and the value labels text is the viewModels value. Now that we have set these up, we can go into our controller and we want to make use of this cell. So we're going to first and foremost register this type of cell for this cell.identifier. Down in our cell for row function, we're going to also want to get rid of this stuff, and we're going to want to dequeue the appropriate type of cell. So we'll go ahead and say this is the Doge cell.identifier, and we're also going to downcast it just like that. If we're not able to downcast, we'll go ahead and say fatal error, and here we're going to say go ahead and configure with a view model. Now we don't have view models yet, we will need to create that, but I'll just throw that in there for now. The expectation is that there is an array of view models on this class. So at the top here, we are going to create a mutable array called viewModels. It's going to be basically the Doge table view cell viewModels, just like that. And after we have actually gotten our data, here we have set up viewModels, we will create our viewModels. Now the number of viewModels we have will also drive the number of cells we have, just like that. So let's go ahead and fill in our viewModels, and then we'll do a quick recap as well, since we typed out quite a bit of code. So let's go ahead and say our viewModels is going to be an array, and we are going to create multiple of these Doge table view cell viewModels based on the info we have. So we know that we have some data here already. We should have a model. So we can say guardlet model is the data, which is the thing we got back from the API call. So here I can go ahead and say model, and we can see we have a name here. So I'm going to say the title for this cell will be a name, just like that. Now let's start and copy and pasting these. So I'm going to say this one, and we'll copy and paste it a few more times. I think we also had a symbol, which is our symbol here. We also had a ID, which is going to be our ID. I'll actually call this identifier instead of being lazy. What else do we have on here? Now we also have a, let's see, model. I think we also had a time on here. So there is a total supply actually, and then there's also a date added. So we can go ahead and say date added, and this is going to be date added. And let's see why this is giving me a hard time. So date added is a string, should not be an issue. Looks like this one is yelling at me. So this is an integer, but we want it to be a string. So we can actually wrap this into a string like that. And let's see what else we have. So we have date added, and it looks like we also have total supply, which is once again a float. So what we could actually do is I can grab this and convert this to a string, just like that. And let's see, we already have the price taken care of. I think that's probably good enough to just give it a run and see where we stand. So one thing that will be interesting is that, well, first and foremost, we have errors, which is not good. So let's see what's going on here. We have a UI label. We need a space there and there. Let's go ahead and build one more time. Looks like we still have some errors. So here we are saying colon when it should have been an equal. Basic syntax errors here and there. The other thing I'll do is we want to set up the table after we have the view models created. So I'm going to move that call right down here. Go ahead and give it a run, and let's see what things are looking like. All right, look at that. We've got DogeCoin's price up there. We've got the logo, and we got our information here as well. Now, a couple of things to take note of are things in the string format are fine, but look at this like date. It doesn't look all too appealing. So one thing that we could do is we could go ahead and use a date formatter to format it to a more friendly, legible date. So just like we used a number formatter up here, I'm going to create a date formatter. The reason we make these static is because these are expensive objects to create over and over. So you want to create one instance of it and just use it over and over like that. This is actually going to be a ISO 8601 date formatter. So we want this one here. This formatter actually allows us to, and actually we can just do it like this. This actually allows us to use the standardized ISO 8601 format, which is the string format that you see this date in right over here. So now what we can do in our view model is instead of saying for date added, use this, we can go ahead and say self.dateFormatter, give me a string from a particular date. So the first thing we'll actually need to do is create a date. So up here, what I'm going to say is guard let date is going to be self dot date formatter, and what we're going to do is we are going to say give me a date from a given string, and we can pass in our date like that, else we can go ahead and return. So now that we have a date, we want to format that to a more friendly date. So I'll go ahead and create another formatter here. So we're going to say static let we'll say pretty date formatter is going to be a date formatter, and this video has gotten much longer than I anticipated, so just bear with me here. This is going to be a date formatter. We're going to go ahead and assign a nice looking format on here. We want, let's see, what do we want? We want this guy right here. We'll go ahead and return. And I'm going to go ahead and say the date style is going to be medium, and that's probably sufficient. So we'll go ahead and now down here, what we can do is we can say self.prettyDateFormatter, give me a string from our date. Otherwise, we'll go ahead and say it's NA, aka not applicable. So let's go ahead and try to run this, and it looks like we have an error. Let's see why that is. So we called this data when that should have been called date. So let's give it a run one more time, and let's see if our date looks good. So it looks like we're actually not able to create a date here, so it's actually returning. Let's actually say failed to create dates, and let's see what the problem is. So we've got a date formatter. We're saying give me a date from the date added. So let's see what the issue here is. Let me print this out, and we'll put that back. You got to match your date formats, otherwise you're going to run into weird issues. So it's saying failed to create date, which makes sense. So this definitely looks like the ISO format. So let's see what's going on here. All right, so we're saying this is a ISO 8601 date formatter. And what I'll also actually go ahead and do, maybe we needed this as well, is we will assign the current locale. So we'll go ahead and return the formatter like we did for the other blocks. We'll say the formatter.locale. Let's try that one more time. Instead of locale, actually, what we'll go ahead and say, let's see, the time zone is what I'm looking for, is going to be current like that. And let's see. So this is the proper formatter. What else do we need to change here? ISO 8601 date formatter. This looks correct to me. Let's take a look at the error. Cannot find type ISO 8601 date. We forgot to put the R back. Minor typo. And let's see, the time zone we're saying is .current, which is perfectly fine. I believe that should be sufficient. Let's see if we can assign a locale on here. It looks like we cannot. Let's go ahead and give it a run once more. And if this date continues to give me a hard time, I'll give it one more shot and we'll just wrap it up since this is kind of not as important. So let's actually use a standard. Let's see. So our string here is in this format. So we've got months, hours, minutes, seconds, which is looking perfectly fine. So this date formatter is a 8601 date formatter. Let's see what else we can pass in here. I don't think anything. So I'm going to click into this and let's see if we have any properties that we particularly care about. There's a formatter option. We might need to supply stuff in there. So not too many things that we can actually do. So we'll go ahead and let's take a look at the formatter.formatter options. And let's see what we can assign to this. So there is with colon separator, with day, with hour, let's see, with full date. I believe we need to account for the milliseconds. So we can actually say with seconds, with fractional seconds, that's what I'm looking for. Let's go ahead and give it a run. And now we should hopefully be getting our dates. All right, looking awesome. So the reason we were first failing is if you take a look at the date printed down here, we are actually getting fractional seconds back from the API. Hence, the standard object doesn't actually support it. But if you take a look at our actual printout here, we have January 1st from the year 2000, which for some reason looks incorrect. So let's see what's going on there. Let me go ahead and say on this, the locale is current, and on this, the time zone is current as well. And let's see, at least that's passing now, which is good. Let's get rid of this print here. Let's see if our date is looking correct now. So still 2000, which is a little strange. I'm not entirely sure why that's happening. I'll need to debug it, but all right, for the sake of time, we'll probably wrap it up here since I did not want to get this far into the weeds here. But basically the idea is we're using the pretty date formatter to get a string from the date. Now that we've gone ahead and actually gotten a string into a date here. So once you've gone ahead and done that, just take a look at your different time zones and whatnot and make sure things are aligning. But that's kind of it. There you have it. That's how you can build a DogeCoin tracker for all of you that are trading DogeCoin and apparently going to the moon. We're not going to do pull to refresh. I know I said we would, but just for the sake of time, I've got a separate video on that. So if you want to know how to build that, take a look there. If you haven't liked the video already, and if you've stuck around through all of my debugging, I appreciate it. Definitely drop a like down below. Subscribe to the channel if you're new and into iOS and want to stick around. I try to do daily uploads here, and comment and let me know if you have any video suggestions, feedback, if you just want to say hi. I always love hearing from you guys. Thanks again for watching. I'll see y'all in the next one.